Hey Grandmasters, Mike from the WCA with another 4 o'clock video. I want to share with you a game that was played a while back, I think in the 80s, by Sunil Weeramantry, who is the founder and chief exec of the National Scholastic Chess Foundation. I had the pleasure of working for Sunil for many years, as did Rusa, and I remember once introducing him at a pretty big Board of Education meeting where they were introducing chess into the school district of New Rochelle, and I introduced him as the executive director of our country. That's a true story. Anyway, Sunil played this game, and in his book he calls the game Three for the Lady. Really, really interesting, and this is the perfect type of position that we would have you guys play from the set positions that we do in class. So let's take a look at the opening and get to the point where you guys would have played this for either black or white. All right, so the game starts as a perk defense. So you'll see that black only puts the pawn out one square to d6. But, you know, it's a real opening. I mean, anytime black makes a move that controls the central square, there's a good chance you're going to see other grandmasters playing it. So when you're white and you have the opportunity, very often you'll put two pawns in the middle. So this stuff is not too difficult. And now after knight f6, you have to decide what to do with your e-pawn. So pushing it to attack the knight is a little premature, because when you make moves with only your pawns at the beginning of the game, you risk having them being overextended. So it's best just to protect this. So if you want, make sure as you're watching this video that you guys know how to pause it. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can just click in the middle of the screen like I'm doing here with the mouse. Just click and the video will pause. So I'm going to ask you several times in this video to just pause it and really spend the time thinking of the best move. So it turns out the most common way to protect the pawn here is with the move knight c3. And if you think about it logically, it's like, why not move the knight? Because knights at the beginning of the game have usually less choices than bishops, right? So why not move the knight to its most natural square? Okay, so black plays g6, indicating that this bishop is going to fianchetto, or fianchetto if I pronounce it correctly, and work on that diagonal. So as you're white, as a new player, if you're not familiar with the opening theory, then you should stop right here and think about the future of that black bishop up on f8. All right, so white to play. Sunil plays one of the less fashionable lines here. He plays bishop to c4, but it is dangerous if you don't know what's going on, because you have to be careful. It is taking aim at this pawn here at f7, and if black's not careful, there could be some trick here and then a knight jump or something at some point. So black continues with bishop e7, and then Sunil plays queen e2. And this is a really cool move. It sets a little bit of a trap, and I'm hesitating to call it a trap because white doesn't really win if black falls into it, but white will get a position that he's comfortable with and he's used to playing, where if black sees this for the first time, he could get into a little bit of trouble. Now, I won't go into why it's not as popular as some of the other moves. What I will say is that by moving the queen from d1 to e2, the queen has abandoned the d-pawn. And I always joke with the real young students that the d-pawns, they're kind of spoiled. When the game starts, the pawn would be here, right? So who's sitting right behind the pawn? The queen. So that pawn is kind of starting the game with the most powerful piece protecting it. So it's kind of rare in the opening that this pawn is left without protection. So with queen e2, black immediately plays knight c6 and attacks the pawn. And this is where computers come in. Computers or coaches or books or any place where you can learn some opening theory. And obviously Sunil knew the theory here, and he plays pawn to e5, which at first glance is just completely shocking, because you not only abandon the pawn, but when black takes this pawn, I do hope you guys can see my mouse cursor, that's going to be hitting the queen. So black's like, okay, thanks. I'll take the pawn and I'll attack your queen. And it's funny. I remember playing in Saratoga about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and I got this same position with white because I learned this opening from Sunil's book. And 2 boards down from me was Sunil playing somebody else, and I tapped him on the shoulder and asked him to come and look at the position that was on the board because my opponent had fallen into something that you'll see later in this game. And many years later, I realized after coaching for a long time that it was probably kind of rude for me to bring Sunil over to look at the board because my opponent was in a difficult situation. And I've had it done to me before. I remember being lost in a couple of games and then people bringing their friends or people over to look at their game that's going on. And when you're in the one, if you're the player that has the good position, that's great. But if not, you probably don't want other people gathering around your board. So as a little hint or a little note for your sportsmanship, if you get a winning position or something exciting against someone, you probably don't want to invite a crowd over to see. Anyway, so after pawn takes pawn, I don't know what Sunil's opponent did. I remember my opponent looked really shocked. And after this move, you just take the knight and you leave your queen hanging. Let me back that up for a minute. It's white's turn in this position. You could move your queen, but then you just hung a pawn, and you're really not sure why. So because this has all been worked out at home, white actually takes the knight on f6, allowing this trade on e2, and then white throws in this very sneaky capture on g7, which is a problem for black because that pawn is now attacking the rook up here on h8, and if that pawn takes the rook, it's going to turn into a queen. And don't forget, you've already taken 2 of black's pieces. So this would be really, really bad for black if white is allowed to capture that rook. So black doesn't allow that and plays the only logical move, rook to g8. And now, guys, you have an option of how to take the knight on e2. In the 4 o'clock class, out of the 4 options, I would expect that every single player, and I mean every single player, would take with the king. Now, I'm just kidding. You don't want to take with the king here. You want to take with this knight on g1. No need to expose the king early, and these other 2 minor pieces who can take are already developed. So I was just kidding. You definitely want to take with the knight on g1. And he does. And now black has a little bit of a dilemma here. I never got to ask Sunil if he thought his opponent had seen this position as black, because if you're a perk player and you play this opening with black, there is a chance you may see this again. And it's amazing. This is actually theory. It's been played, dozens of times before. So I don't know if black was aware of this, but the people who have had this with black, they have a problem. They could spend a tempo developing and not capture this rook, but if you don't, this pawn rather. But if you don't take the pawn, white could always play bishop h6 and support it, and that means you're going to have to live with this pawn so close to queening, which would tie down this rook for a long time. So because of that, black usually decides to take it right away. That's the good news. The bad news for black is that they're going to lose a tempo again. And if you need to pause your video, you can. But to gain a tempo, white plays bishop h6, attacking an undefended piece, and black retreats. Okay, so it's at this point where you can take your first kind of assessment. So if you need to pause the video, you can do that and look at this position for a while and go through the typical steps that you do when you're analyzing a position. Look at the material first, and you'll see in this position the material is almost equal. White has 3 minor pieces for the queen. And in his book, in this chapter, it's actually called 3 for the lady. So those pieces are accounted for, but what about the pawns? And if you look up at the top of the board, you'll see that black still has all 8 of their pawns, and white is missing 2. So in terms of material, white is down 2 points because 3 minor pieces are worth a queen, that's equal. But with the 2 pawns that are missing, you might say that white is down or losing, but they're really not. This is one of the rare cases where being up material actually hurts you temporarily, and here's why. Because black has all 8 pawns, how does the remaining pieces here, or how do the remaining pieces at the top of the board, how are they affected by the structure? And it turns out of the 4, there's only 1 minor piece left. Minor pieces do really well in the openings because they're easy to get out. The rooks and the queen are not as nimble. They're not as quick to get into the game. So because there are no open files, the black pawns are actually slowing black down. Okay? If you need to pause your video to think about that for a while, I highly recommend that you do. So if this were running on a computer, a modern computer might consider this position close to equal. But if you're a human, and I'm telling you, playing this position for the first time with either color can be really, really tricky. So next semester, this may be a position we choose for you guys to play out. So those students who are doing the work and watching the video will have a big head start. Okay, so from here, what to do? Well, I'll give you a hint. White wants to castle. Does it matter which side you castle on? Both moves will make the king safe and connect the rooks. Okay, pause the video. Which way are you going to castle and why? Okay, he goes queenside. And the reason he's going queenside is primarily he wants to get both rooks to the central files as quickly as possible. And by castling queenside, you can see by the arrows, you already put one of the rooks on the file. It only takes one other move to put the second rook here. If you were to castle kingside, it would take 3 moves to get the rooks to the center. So that's why he castled kingside. And black has to continue to get the pieces out. But again, their problem is how. It's not so easy. So in the game, c6 was played, and you can see by the arrow here, it's designed to bring the queen out on this diagonal, eventually develop the light squared bishop, castle queenside, and just get on with things. And now it's a middle game. It's a question of who plays better. So there's the centralizing rook. And how does he find that move, by the way? If we go back to after c6, it's white's turn. This is where a lot of players have trouble, guys, and I hope this makes sense to you, that if you don't see any tactics, if you don't see any clear path, like some people might try moves like knight here. I know there could be a fork, but remember, this pawn would be pinned. The idea would be to jump here and hit this pawn twice. That stuff is all well and good, but you have to remember that, you know, if you move the knight right away, the bishop might come out and attack it. Possible playable, the bishop could come to e6 right away and clog you up in the middle. And you probably don't want to allow a trade on these lines, because if you make a trade here or here, you're going to open up a file. And if you open up the file, don't forget that black is, you know, they might be able to swing a piece in there. So why rook h to e1? Because it brings the last piece into the game. Okay, so as a little tip, you don't see something clear, bring your last piece into the game. All right, black to play. Queen c7, and again, white's turn, nothing clear to do. Your rooks have been connected, they've also been centralized. Your king is safe. Every minor piece is doing their fair share, at least from the opening. But now the middle game takes place. And this is not such an easy game to plan for white, because the pawn structure has not been established for, or it won't be for a long time. And what do I mean by that? When pawns are in close contact with one another, it's especially when they're locked, it's almost easy or easier to plan where to put your pieces. You know, for example, if all of your pawns are on light squares and you have a light squared bishop that's not working, then part of your plan might be to free that bishop. But here, this involves piece play. You don't really want to start pushing pawns as white here because it's not clear where they belong. So what he does is he improves his worst piece. So in your opinion, which is white's worst piece, and why do you think it's the worst piece? Okay, whatever you chose, as long as you think the move helped your position, that's all we're looking for. What happens in the game was the move knight d4. He simply takes the piece, centralizes it, and it also sets a little bit of a trap, which black falls right into. His idea is really good, but his timing is very bad. He plays the move bishop f5. So, why is the idea good? Well, the idea is to develop his last piece before castling, and it also kind of sets a positional trap. And when I say positional, I mean it's simply the trade itself would not benefit white. It would benefit black. And if I click on the highlights, you should see why. Black is ready to castle, and an open file was created for one of his heavy pieces. Once the king castles, black could either win or put pressure on this pawn, lift this rook, attack the bishop, and then double the rooks, and before you know it, black is really getting counterplay. So the question you would have if you were playing this for the first time is, after bishop f5, would you take the bishop? Okay, he doesn't. Well, it turns out there's a killer tactic here. Pause your video and figure it out. All right. Hopefully you found one of your knights hopping to b5. Crunch. Awesome move. It looks really bizarre. It's a very hard move to find if you haven't seen this position. But the reason it's so strong is that, well, one, your queen is hanging. What to do with your queen. And number two, you have to be very careful because this pawn is hanging as well. If white gets to take this pawn and you take back with something, there's a rook here and there's a rook here. Remember that move, rook h to e1? This pawn up here on e7, it's pinned. So I think at this point black realized he's going to have to give some material back. So first he takes more, but then the second knight hits the pawn, attacking the queen. Well, it looks like there's a free bishop here, but it's not so free. If you take it, do you see how to get the queen back? Just take the pawn check. And when the king moves out of check, you'll see these two lines. There's going to be a nasty discovered check. You can't take the knight because of the pin, and when you do move the king out, you're walking right onto this open file. You're going to lose your queen with check. So for example, if you play king d7, off comes the queen, and now black is completely lost. Remember that black gave up 3 minor pieces for the queen, and here white only gave 2 of them back. The pawns are equal, but now black is down a full piece, and worse, because the king has no shelter. He can't really stay on the 7th rank here or come up to the 6th. This pawn is being attacked by this rook, and if he does come to e8, he has to be careful he doesn't get mated, or it could be another knight check and just repeat all of this again. And I love this piece on h6. The whole time it's been pretty quiet, but it's keeping the king out of these squares here, which is just an incredible piece. I'll draw a little arrow there for you. So anyway, black was in big trouble. So going back after this move, knight takes, the queen went to b6. Now the knight just takes on d6. And black has the same problem. If the queen takes the knight, the rook just takes the queen back, and you can't recover because of the king being the king's pawn here being pinned. So it's check. He decides to make a run for it. Now in this position, you take the bishop on f5. And by taking on f5, it's check. So the pawn can't take back. You have a wide open file here, and black is lost. And here you almost have something of a king hunt. After king c7, there are multiple ways to win this game. Bishop f4 is crushing. In the game, Sunil chose rook takes e7. If the king goes in the corner, he's going to get hit with this bishop check. If he comes to this square, he's going to get hit with this knight check. So sometimes you just have to, hope and pray you can survive out here in the open, but you can't. So if you need to pause your video and just figure out how you would finish the game off, you can, or just watch the finale here. Rook check, protected by the knight. King went to c5, then rook e5, offering a free bishop, which really can't be taken, but it was. Then b3 check, and black resigns. If you play, for example, king c3, you have mate in 1. Can you find it? Bishop d2, there's my friend from h6, been very quiet, finishes the game with a mate. And after b3 check, I think you can also go to b4. And then now you can, there's a whole queen hanging up here, so you're having a lot of fun. But I like this move. This is really cool. Just king b2. And now you're threatening all these little pawn checks that are going to mate the king. You can take the rook. There's just too much here. And the game is lost. Okay? So I hope you enjoyed the video and you have a good memory, because next week you'll get a chance to, or next semester, to play this out yourselves. Okay? Sunday's the simul. Get a good night's sleep Saturday night, because Roos and I don't plan on losing any games. Have a good week.